Okay, so what we're going to do now is start to create the thumb for the hand. So in the previous lesson, we already created the basic forms for the palm of the hand. Now we're going to be using some advanced modeling techniques to create the thumb. So before we can do that, I'm going to actually explain to you some really important things that you need to know in Blender. And this basically is going to give you a higher confidence level when you're working on your 3D models, so you don't get confused about how things work in Blender. Okay, so go ahead and just right click on this face. Okay, and now press the period key on your numpad and it'll just simply zoom in. Now remember, we are in obviously edit mode from the previous lesson. Now I'm going to do the scroll wheel on my mouse. You can see that we can simply zoom in and out on the selection, and then if we press the middle mouse button down, we can actually rotate around this selection, and this is all possible because we press the period key. It simply put the selection right smack in the middle. Okay, now I want you to zoom out over here. Now go ahead and rotate this so you get the other side of the figure. Now notice that when we are in ortho view, if I zoom in over here, it doesn't matter how much I'm zoomed in, I'm always going to see the full 3D model that I'm working on. Okay, so it's like I cannot go inside the 3D model, and this is only because we are in ortho view. Okay, now I want you to go ahead and just zoom in and now press the 5 key, and this will now switch to perspective. Okay, now if you do the middle mouse button and rotate, notice that we get to travel inside our object. So this is a really powerful feature in Blender, because what this means is that you can actually get inside your 3D model and start manipulating the vertices, the edges and faces into really tricky areas in your 3D model, right? So make sure you understand how this feature works in Blender. Okay, so that's the first thing that I want you to know about. Now go ahead and press the 1 key and press the tab key, and this is going to have your figure selected. Now go ahead and press the period key. So now this is going to zoom, basically put the figure right smack in the middle like it did the face that we had selected. So you can do that in object mode. If you do the middle mouse button, you can see that I can rotate around it. Now I press the 1 key and do shift middle mouse button to just pan this right here, kind of like get the face in the middle and just zoom in. Okay, I can do the middle mouse button and now rotate around the object. Okay, but now notice that when we come in close on the face, see how this perspective is? It's really looking abnormal over here. So there's a reason behind this as to why it does this. Okay, so the 3D viewport, you can imagine this as a camera system. The 3D viewport is something that we can use like a camera to move around a 3D scene, and it allows us to manipulate our 3D model, right? Now, what this means is, because it's basically a camera system that exists in the 3D viewport, for editing your 3D models, it's obviously going to have a lens. So if you click on this, go under the view tab, you can see that it has a lens setting, and it's set on 35. This is why it's giving you this really high perspective view over here. Now I like to keep this at 74 when I'm working on my 3D models. If I do 74, you can see what it's going to do. It's going to zoom in a little bit more. Now if you zoom out, you'll see that it starts to give a much more natural feel to the perspective, right? If I zoom out and just do A to D select, you can see that the figure is now looking more natural, like it does in real life. Okay, so make sure that you understand that you can do this again. Okay, so the reason this is doing this is because it's as if you are standing really far away, and then you're using a very powerful zoom lens, and when you zoom in on a subject, it's obviously going to start to take away the perspective, right? This is something that happens in real life too, in real camera systems. Okay, so now having shown this to you, what I want you to understand is, because this is the 3D view, this is basically the camera system that we are manipulating with the middle mouse button over here that exists in the 3D view. Okay, but the camera is actually a separate concept, and this camera is what we use to actually render our 3D scene. So if I click on this camera, if I zoom out over here, you'll see that the camera is hidden. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this eye over here. Now the camera appears over here. So go ahead and press the period key and we'll now home in on the camera. Now if you do the middle mouse button, you can see that the camera is really just showing you that how it's looking at your 3D object. Now in order to be able to see what the camera is seeing, you have to press the 0 key on the numpad, and this is what the camera is actually looking at. Okay, now notice that over here it says camera perspective. Okay, now I'm just going to do middle mouse button to rotate, and notice that if I zoom out, it automatically gets out of the camera view, and you can tell this by looking over here. It says user perspective. Now press the 5 key and we're back in ortho view. Now if I zoom out, you can see that there is no more perspective over here. Now if I press the 0 key and go to my camera view, notice that it changed back to camera perspective, right? So this tells you that there are two different camera systems here. One that exists for the 3D viewport, and one is the actual camera that you use to set it up to render your 3D scene. So now if you have the camera selected over here, go on the camera tab, notice that it says perspective. Notice over here that it says camera perspective. So if I click on ortho, it'll change to camera ortho, right? There's no perspective now in the camera 3D view. Okay, so make sure that you know about this concept over here. Now notice that over here in the 3D viewport that we were using the lens, we changed this to 74. But in the camera system, it's still at 35. And notice that over here in the focal, it's saying 35, right? So the camera has its own lens system. Okay, so that's all I'm going to talk about in the camera over here for this lesson. I really don't want to spend time on this right now. Just want to make sure that you understand this concept. So now if I do the middle mouse button, it'll just go back to where it was, right? You can just click on the figure, just press the period key to home in on it, and just zoom in over here. Press the 1 key. Okay. Now the reason I'm showing this to you is because it has to do with that face that we have selected. Go ahead and click on tab to go into edit mode, and just press the period key again. Okay, so we're back in ortho view. Now press the 5 key. Now notice that we're back in perspective and we're using this lens at 74. Now notice what happens if I do the middle mouse button and rotate inside the figure. You can see that I can get inside the figure, but if I rotate like this, I'm now seeing the other side of the figure, right? So it's hard, you kind of like have a limited zoom level. So this is why we have to set on 35, really. If you think about it, now because this is set on 35, it gives you more room to work with, right? Because it's giving you really more of a wide angle view. You can think of it this way. Now notice that when you are inside like this and you press the 5 key going to ortho over here, it's just going to take you out of it, and you can press 5 to go back in. Okay, so now I just wanted to make sure that you understand these general concepts here as to how they work, because they will allow you to really manipulate and work on your 3D model with more confidence. Okay, so what we're going to do now, just press the 5 key, and we don't have to be in perspective anymore. I'm back on ortho. We're now going to talk about an advanced subject here. Now I'm going to explain this to you in very layman terms over here, right? You can read up on these concepts at a deeper level, but I'm just going to give you a general understanding of this idea. Okay, I'm going to do tap. So the first thing that I want you to notice, that if you zoom out over here, you can notice that the figure is being rendered very nicely in the 3D viewport. And as we said, that the 3D viewport is really more like a camera system, right? It has its own lens, and we can really rotate and move it around just like how we want to. So it's kind of acting like your own eye over here. Okay, now in order for a Blender to actually render this, it obviously needs a light source. You can see that in the 3D viewport, it has a default light source. Okay, now notice that it has nothing to do with these two lights. I can shut them off. These are only for the cycles renderer. Okay, so it has an invisible light source somewhere. You can see that it's coming from the right side. So in order for Blender to actually render this correctly, what it's going to do is basically take the light rays from the light source, strike them on your object, and then obviously those rays that are going to hit the actual faces of the 3D model are going to come back to the 3D viewport that's going to give you the illusion of the 3D model, right? I'm giving you the most simplest example of how your eye works and how these 3D modeling packages work over here, okay? So I'm going to explain this a little deeper over here. Now let's go ahead and zoom in on this hand over here and just do tap. Okay, so now notice, in order for Blender to be able to render this correctly, what it needs to do, or what it does, is basically looks at the actual face first. Okay, then it looks at, okay, what angle is this face at, and where's my light source? So if the ray is going to hit this face, it's going to obviously hit it at that specific angle, and that ray is going to bounce all around and then come to finally to that 3D viewport that will allow you to see this face correctly render in your 3D scene. Okay, now notice that when the face starts to turn, really go in this other direction, these areas start to get darker, right? If I do tab, you can see that these are more darker over here because the faces are really pointing in the other direction, right? Now, in order to be able to see what angle these faces are pointing at, what you can do is over here, if you come down over here under the mesh display, you can see that what we have is something called normals. So if I click on this face, you're going to get these blue lines, and you can see how these blue lines are now starting to turn. So this gives you a general idea as to which direction these faces are pointing at, right? And this is how Blender is able to use this information, really these angles, to determine how to render this correctly in the 3D viewport. Obviously, it's going to do the same thing when you actually render it in your camera view. Okay, so the normals are also telling you that this is the direction that this face is facing at. Okay, so what do I mean by this? So if I click on this face and make sure that I'm in perspective mode, I'm going to press the 5 key and press the period key to zoom in on it. Now, if you go to the inside of this, you can see that the blue lines are not appearing over here. So basically what this is telling you is that this face over here, Blender is going to render it depending on where this blue line is pointing at, right? This is the direction of the face, really the top side of the face is what this blue line is representing also. Okay, now if you look inside, you can see that we're not going to get this blue line. It's because this face, we don't want Blender to render this. This is basically what we're saying. So if you do W and do flip normals, you can see that something strange happens over here. If I do A to D select over here, see that blue line is gone. Now if you go into inside the object, you can see that this blue line is now in this direction, meaning that now we're telling Blender that this is the top side of the face, this is the direction the face is pointing at, and this is how you should actually render it. Okay, and now if you go on the other side, you can see that Blender has stopped rendering these faces because it's not the top side, right? So where this blue line is pointing at, right, your 3D viewport has to be able to see this this line over here. So if it's pointing into the direction really of the 3D viewport, it's going to render it. Okay, now to understand this a little better, you have this option over here under shading. You can click on backface culling. So I'm going to go ahead and click this. Notice that it stops rendering this. Okay, so we can see the inside of the hand. Now backface culling is something that is used in video game engines, okay, all the time. It's because this allows us to not waste memory resources when we are creating scenes in a 3D game engine, right? There's no point in rendering the other side of the face. So if you go inside over here, look what happens. The back face is called, it's showing you that all the back faces, the underneath of the face that we don't want to render, Blender has stopped rendering this. Again, this is only in the 3D viewport over here. It's allowing you to see this, okay? So now I can really just see through the object on the other side. Remember, you have to be on the inside of the object or on the back side of the face. And the reason we can see the whole figure on the other side is because we're seeing the top side of the faces, right? Now if I go over here, you can see that this is why it's working this way. Now to see this a little better, you can actually switch to object mode, and over here just do flat shading, okay? And now do tap over here. See how this is working? Now you can see that if you actually even disable this, here Blender is not even rendering this anymore, okay? So this is this idea of normals, how they work. You can obviously change the size of this. This doesn't really do anything. It's really just a visualization tool over here. You can change the size if you want to just see this more, whatever. So I'm just going to do 0.10 over here the way it was, okay? So anyways, the idea, I just want to explain to you that this is what this is, okay? So now if you click on this and do W and flip normals, it'll just come back. Now the thing to remember about the back face culling is when you are working on your 3D objects, sometimes you'll get faces that are not facing in the right direction, right? And you can find them by clicking on this. And if you start to see holes in your 3D model, you can find those faces, click them and do W and just do flip normals, okay? So anyways, the reason I'm showing you all this stuff is because it has to do with its normals. Now, if you take a look at this gizmo over here, now notice that this is your the 3D manipulator. This is your transformation. So if I click on this, I can move it, right? I have the snapping enabled. That's not why it's not working. And you can obviously click on this and rotate, and you can do this and click on these little things and scale them. And the other thing here is that if you just click this down, actually if you press the shift key down, click it, you can actually click all of them at the same time. This gets a little confusing. Just know that you can do that. Anyways, what I want you to notice is that I'm going to press the 5 key to go back into ortho. Notice that how this 3D manipulator is right? It's on global. So if I rotate it like this, look where this blue arrow is going. Notice that it's the same thing happening over here on the bottom left, right? Because this is the global angle that we're using. Now notice that when we switch to local, it's not going to really do anything because this is really the local angle of your 3D model, right? If I do tap to show you, see, this is the local angle. And if I do R to rotate 2 times, I'm going to just do this. See, the local angle is now different than the global angle. See this? I'm going to Control Z that to put it back the way it was, okay? Now we're going to go ahead and just click on smooth shading over here. Now I'm going to go to tab, going to go back to this guy over here, okay? So now the difference between global and local. The local is for the whole 3D object. Now notice that when you're in edit mode, it doesn't care about local. So if I do R 2 times, and I'm going to rotate this like this, notice that the local is still the same because it's based on the entire 3D object, right? And that's not just on this. Now I'm going to do Control Z that. Now notice what happens in normal. Now we can look at the normal. We can actually manipulate this based on how this face is facing, okay? So this is what we're going to be now doing when we create the thumb. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that I explained some of these concepts to you. I'm just going to go ahead and reload this file back the way we were. We're not going to do anything. Now next lesson we'll start to manipulate and start to create the thumb using these advanced concepts. So we'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you.